Hello everyone, welcome to my shop. This is going to be a pretty quick and simple video on how to install a Z1 fuel pressure port and an Aeromotive fuel pressure gauge on my 2005 350Z time attack car. Doing this mostly just so I have a point of reference and a way to troubleshoot at the track, and it'll also help me for potential future upgrades as well. Pretty easy install, doesn't require a lot of tools. One important thing, you do want to disconnect your battery before you do this. You're going to be working on the fuel system in that area, and disconnecting the fuel system and letting it sit for a while will also help to depressurize the fuel system before we disconnect things. So I'm going to move some stuff around. I'm going to go ahead and get started. This Z1 fuel port comes pre-tapped with two different types of threads. Depending on what type of fuel gauge you're using and where you are in the world, it may matter which one you're using. In my case, I know that the Aeromotive one is NPT, so I'm going to have to remove the NPT plug to install the fuel gauge. But before that, I'm going to go ahead and remove the BSP, the British pipe tap plug on the other side first, and install some fuel safe thread sealant. Z1 already has some kind of thread sealant on here, but I want to know what is on here. That way I know I can trust it. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp this up in some soft jaws so I don't risk damaging it. Remove this. This is a 5mm plug. Clean off around the area. I'm going to go ahead and apply some of this ARP fuel safe thread sealant onto the threads, low on the threads. That way it works its way up as I tighten it in. So now that I've got this with some thread sealant on it, you do want to make sure that you don't get any thread sealant down on the face here. You don't want it going down in. That could potentially gum up your fuel system at a later date. Once it's snugged up, I'm going to go ahead and turn it another 180 degrees so that it's good and snug in there. You can take a paper towel and kind of clean off around this, just to kind of make sure, just kind of clean up the look of it a little bit. But the next step is going to be to go ahead and start getting ready to install the gauge. So I'm going to remove the NPT pipe plug here. This is a 3/16 hex key. Set that plug aside. You won't need it again. My Aeromotive gauge here, as I said, is the NPT thread. Same process. I'm going to install some of this ARP low or high temp fuel safe thread sealant onto the threads. Once again, being extremely careful not to get anywhere near this orifice here in the gauge, because that would really mess up the reading and could potentially mess up your fuel system. After I've applied the sealant, I'm going to go ahead and start to thread this down into the fuel port. I'm not going to tighten it too tight, holding on to the gauge here, because I don't want to risk damaging the gauge. Once I get it kind of snugged up, I'm going to go ahead with a 7/16 wrench. Go ahead and tighten this in pretty tight. You're going to want to kind of think about orientation of the gauge. The Z1 lettering is on top. You're going to probably want the top side and the top of your gauge to be in the same orientation. So think about that as you tighten it in. After you've installed the gauge, if you would like, you can kind of clean up the excess sealant around the threads here. I'm going to go ahead and leave this. I'm not worried about it. You are also going to want to make sure that there is a new O-ring seal on the bottom of the fuel port here. This was included from Z1. You do need another one for the actual fuel inlet on the manifold. So next we're going to move the camera over and we're going to talk about removing the fuel line from the car so that we can go ahead and get this installed. Now that we've moved over to the car, once again, it is very important that you do disconnect the battery and let it sit for at least half an hour. That will reduce, hopefully, the fuel pressure in the lines and therefore reduce the risk of fuel spray when you go ahead and remove this. We're going to be removing these two bolts right here. Just removing the bolts should not have any effect on fuel spray. It's not until we remove this part that we have to worry about it. With the bolts removed, you are going to want to put a paper towel around this and slowly pull up, twisting a little bit as you do, being very, very careful and paying attention to potential fuel spray. It is also extremely important that your motor is cold before you do this because of the risk of fire, since there is definitely some fuel around this area. The next step is going to be to replace this O-ring here that is on the end of the fuel supply line. It is very helpful to have a pick in here. This is supposed to be a one-time use O-ring, so as I said, I'm going to have the part number in the description below. I'm going to go ahead and work this off. Go ahead and install my new one, being careful not to risk any damage to it. Once this is on, we can go ahead, take our Z1 fuel port adapter, once again with the new O-ring installed. I'm going to go ahead and set this down in and align the holes. We're going to go ahead and then take the new O-ring and factory fuel line, go ahead and install it onto here the same way. Next, we'll take the extended hardware that came with the kit. Once they're snugged down, I'm going to need to go ahead and torque them. The factory spec for these is 8.4 Newton meters, which is 75 inch-pounds. At this point, it's a very good idea to let the car sit for a little bit. You definitely spilled some fuel. Give it some time for the fuel to evaporate before you try and start the car. Double check and make sure that you don't have too much pressure on any of these lines here, that because you are pulling this line a little bit tighter, but just make sure that everything looks okay. In a little bit, I'll go ahead and restart this thing, check for leaks. You need to double check on the port on the back as well as the gauge on the front that you've installed. And that's it for the install. Overall, very easy, doesn't require any real specialty tools. Should be helpful in case I ever have to troubleshoot a running problem at the track. Looks pretty cool too. They did a really good job of that block. Once again, triple check, make sure that you do not have any fuel leaks at either the plug on the back side or the fuel gauge on the front side. You do not want to fire because of this install. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. There'll be more videos coming.